Hello there, my name is Alton. I'm a local Christian minister as well as I'm the chair of the Movement for Justice and Reconciliation, an organization established to make legacy history. That is, we want to highlight the public that there is a legacy of colonial slavery, and also there's a legacy of industrial exploitation. The enslavement of Africans by the colonial powers has created a legacy which still goes on today. And what that did was create a disconnect between people who were the perpetrators of slavery and those who were enslaved. In fact, the legacy goes on so much that we have now in our societies entrenched racism because during that period of enslavement, there was a strata, a system, a pigmentocratic system with white at the top and black at the bottom, and all the different shades of color in between, which subjugated the black man to the bottom of the pile. And so consequently, he was seen as nothing. And then during slavery, black lives did not matter. 10 days ago, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis in the United States. And we all seen the images on the television with a white law enforcement officer having his knee on his neck for about 8 minutes or so. And Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, he was unarmed, and he was calling out, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And the officer took no notice of his cries. He even cried for his mother. "I want my mother, I can't breathe." But his cries were unheard. The 4 police officers just stood there and watched as the life slowly went from him and he stopped breathing. Now, the death of George Floyd has sparked a lot of uproar across the world. And what that white racist who had his knee on his neck was saying is that there is the systemic evil throughout the Western world which has those people who are of African origin, and they will not stop until they choke the very life out of us. And so, as a minister and also as the chair for the Movement for Justice and Reconciliation, we know that God is a God of justice and He's a God of righteousness. And we are all created in His image. I was looking at part of the American Constitution the other day. America got their independence in 1776. And when they wrote the Constitution, they wrote this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator to certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Obviously, the people who penned these words didn't take them seriously because they built their society off the back of slavery. The very authors of this independence document, Thomas Jefferson and so on, they had slaves, they kept slaves, they violated slaves, they had children with slaves. And they said that there are certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where was his right to life? Where was his ability to pursue happiness? It was snuffed out by this racist murderer. And so at MJR, we are calling the church to act. We're calling all the church leaders to act. We're calling them not to sit idly by. We're calling them to have empathy with what's going on. We're calling them to share the message of love and forgiveness and also justice. We're calling them to speak out. We're calling them to call out racism where they see it. Because we know that the church, the body of Christ, has not dealt with sin and they've promoted racism. Now it's time to hold our hands up, to lament, to cry out to God for the sin that we have done in keeping silent, and to act, to do something. Act as individuals, act as a community, act as a church, and then act in the places where where power is wielded. I'm also calling on the British government to act. I'm calling them to act on four fronts. Number one, I want them to offer a full apology for the enslavement of Africans. Not a deep regret that Tony Blair mentioned when he was Premier from 1997 till 2010, but a full written apology for Britain's deep involvement in taking millions of Africans from the coast of Africa to the Caribbean to put the great in Britain. I'm also calling on the British government to institute a process of reparation which will dismantle the systems of white privilege and decolonize the criminal justice system, decolonize the police and the judiciary. We know that in Britain today, if you're a black person, if you're a black man in particular, and you come under the hands of the criminal justice system, you will get a harsher sentence. In London here, you are 3 times more likely to be stopped if you're black under this new SUS law than any other race or ethnicity. And thirdly, we're asking the government to take black history seriously. You know, when they teach slavery in the national curriculum, it's taught as an economic exercise. We want it to be taught as genocide. It's killing millions of people, not an economic exercise. And finally, I'm calling on the government to provide funds to back healing centres. I'm going to call those COVID recovery centres, where we deal with psychological rehabilitation. The trauma that our folks have gone through and are still going through, we need to be healed. Those from the diaspora, the African and Caribbean diaspora, to be healed. And we can only be healed when we deal with what Dr. DeGruy calls post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I'm calling on the community, particularly the black communities, African and Caribbean communities, to take responsibility. Take responsibility on an individual level. To do that, we need a change of heart, not to hate our oppressors, but to pray for them. We're calling on the community to take responsibility on a familial level. As parents, teach your children righteousness. Teach them the word. Teach them to act appropriately. And we're calling on our community who are part of the church community to deal with injustices and issues. Don't just stand idly by. And then we can change the culture around us. And I've written a book called Breaking the Chains of Mental Slavery. You can get that from me. And in here I discuss the history of how we've got where we are and provide some solutions for us to break the chains of mental slavery. And in conclusion, let me say that Bob Marley says, none but ourselves can set us free. Okay? And everywhere there's war. And we can be free. We will be free if we start with ourselves. And if we don't walk on by on the other side, we call out injustice so that we can dismantle the post-colonial racist structures that still allow white privilege to prevail.